The way my sister explained it was one of them is like a mellow high, and one of them is like you get sucked up for it. It is, it's weird. And then like when you go to a this
Wait, is that here?
No.
But there's friends that make it one, right?
Yeah. I mean, my friends make one in Colorado.
Is that the entire state you can go anywhere?
Yeah.
It was very confusing.
Yeah.
They probably have regulations.
Is it like,
No, I'm not.
I mean, I went with the same
I went to DC for a wedding over New Year.
Oh, it's a little bit different.
No, it's legal to student. It's illegal to purchase.
No, Star Wars.
So you listen to Yeah, I
the
learned that.
smallest state in America?
It's not even a state. Yeah, I mean, we're all also like how expensive supposed to relax. I'd like to make normal stuff, like where you feel like. I was bad this week. I mean, it was nice. Oh, okay, she didn't hear.
Hey, Russell.
Hey, Jonathan, quick question for you. We are going to have to divide students into groups based on like what they're good at, different groups than they're already in.
Right.
For this exercise. So I think I'm just going to have them like Slack me. I'm going to ask everyone to Slack me how they're doing on like CSS, JavaScript, everything, and then we'll reorganize them.
Right, because they have to do it based on project, right? It's like project based.
Yeah, it's like project based.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll have to figure out how to do that. Maybe I'll tell everyone to go like stand in a corner based on which one they want to do.
Right, and then you grab from those people on the strongest and the weakest.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
That morning, we do this, and like, I'm not doing that. So I basically like sign them up for another hour.
Yeah, like Tuesday, I still have like this little figure out how to do it. Start over. And I left it open functions and I start over and I get it cleaner, a lot more organized, and just wait.
Was it busy out there?
Something else is thinking. Again, that's just example. I'm used to that. Yeah.
Do you know how you turn off that window on the right hand side?
Hey, Cortana. Open Sublime. Oh. Computer.
This thing, you can't write.
You probably could if you were.
Tried everything. Well, that's my files. So that- There you go. This is my first year with my students ever. I'm so excited. From what?
I got it online.
Hey, by the way, I bought that little thing. That little-
Oh, really?
I love that. I'm embarrassed that I know it's in there.
Hey, Pedro.
Wait, why would I put
Hey, Pedro.
Oh, yeah, you didn't see the, you have access to it?
But. Remember that last time you helped with that?
Yeah, make sure he's working on the right stuff. Cause you thought the calculator was homework or something? Yeah, that was a class exercise. You don't need to finish that.
Yeah, because I asked them,
Yeah. I forgot the Costa Ricans call his name. Yeah, because I was telling her in the homeland, we call it Greca, and he's like,
yeah.
Damn, so you use a Greca? So cute. Oh my god, you have an old soul.
And then you get there.
Is that the thing?
Is it on?
Is that the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do it for myself.
I do a French press too.
It's not that.
I've been thinking about getting here right now, but there's sometimes I don't have the patience.
I'm
I'm so glad you also say that. People be like, oh, that's so cool.
No, it's something else.
No, people always try to throw me on shit like, oh, right.
Do you have access to that? What is the
You are feeling better. You're ready. Mommy's ready, Jonathan.
For what? I don't know.
I love it.
No, it's very hard. Okay, it's difficult.
I've been having random dates of JavaScript.
I was looking at the little changes over there.
Yeah, I don't have to.
I have people in my apartment, but I don't really know how to access it. So,
If you get it from Zeta, it's on.
it's on NBC.
It's on NBC. There's a hockey team. The US hockey team.
Oh, the women's hockey team. And the first time since 1998. Did you know there were no NHL players on the men's hockey team?
Is this why? Is this what you're using for?
Yeah, they use like minor league players and college people.
That's why they're not good.
Hey, I'm not
What?
afraid I use that.
Yeah, imagine how much we did with basketball.
Oh my God.
Alright, but that's the one you use. Okay,
But,
so this is, I'm
like,
gonna add you to that.
I worked at.
Thank you.
Oh, it was Las Vegas. Maybe, yeah, they're the ones recently acquired or recently created the team. Their hockey team is actually doing pretty well. And they've recorded. some
Okay,
people
you'll get an email,
who are retired.
or actually try now to, you should be able to access.
They don't have those on. Las Vegas.
No, that's only one that.
At the groups of project. Yeah, project.
What's that Colorado thing called?
Okay, then check your email, then you should have it.
It's hard for me to go because don't need to be in the gym when I'm camping. You know, I don't know anyway. People People always doubt that I'm from there. You got all your-
Hey, what's up?
I'm just
Here early.
Yeah. Happens. I got here early today too. So.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
If you go to private high school. Oh, God. You know, they're having their sets on fairs. Yeah, I was at the NPR today and I didn't know it was gonna be at Ransom, so.
Hey, how are you?
In the wild.
It says he joined 2 minutes ago. So try going to the link that I sent you guys.
Yeah. Just give me a minute. The hit on I don't want to have to depend on any
I
given
want to go
time.
back.
Right.
I don't be able to see it.
I need to, that's, I wanted to that damn handbag.
Yeah, like the jQuery one, I was like, oh shit, I crashed just by myself with the 991, I need to go back and redo that over and over. I even did it as a.
Lauren and
I
Sam
went through this, I
us,
loaded this.
you should watch us do it. Hangman. I struggle with Hangman.
I need to go. Sorry, I was crying.
Show us your Hangman.
My Hangman's on Zoom, but it's like
You can go sit over there, Sam, if you want. You guys are losing Sam. Sorry, this group.
What do you mean we're losing Stan?
We're
team,
making some,
Jonathan.
yeah, well, we get to make regrouping decisions. You guys are still a team. You're just a team minus Sam.
This is Team Falcon though.
What happened to
Oh my God.
You know, your quarterback.
Yeah, I know, right?
We already lost one.
I know, we lost one person.
We're not trading.
We lost our
Right,
general
believe me,
counsel.
Oh, really? He's coming back. I think he should be here. I don't know.
Where is Sam gonna go? He has to stay with us.
No, he's gonna work with Fabian. Then you got a new assignment too, Gretel. Did you see that? I'm gonna pair you and Pedro for now, and then I'm gonna be putting Fabian with Sam and Martha when she gets here. And then we might make some new assignments later, but for this week. And then,
Okay, we
We'll let him
understand.
out.
yeah, I know it's sad.
Team Falcon's been dissolved.
I thought it was Team Salamander. You? Oh, so you guys are partners now? Okay, so we're gonna find. Can you find him a new partner? Somebody that's pretty strong. Yeah. So there are a few. Like who's strongest? You think?
right now,
Yes.
Ryan Brett is pretty strong. He's been helping out John a lot.
Okay. So yeah. So what's his
So,
name?
John and I think it's Mario.
No, that's not Mario. That's Mario.
That is.
No, it's the antibiotics. They think that actually they're killing the system.
So small.
But I still have to do the ENT to get another. One of the things that I'm quite curious again, how it's in my brain. Oh, yeah. That's
No,
Yeah, that's right.
No, this one.
Oh, yeah.
I know what a cyst is.
Wait, click on it to set it for me.
Yeah.
No, that's so weird.
Wait, what did you, oh, you shaved your head?
Oh, I could probably go through.
Yeah.
Boot camp
Or
stuff?
do you want to see the pain exactly?
Oh, yeah.
And I guess we could just. It's been like a month.
And then I found 5 different tutorials.
Yes.
Try to understand.
It was, and they all did it differently, and then when you tried, you looked it up. Yeah.
In fact, I even wrote a tutorial PDF that I'm sure was meant for 10-year-olds.
Because I know everyone wants.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry, you're So I'm gonna have you two work.
He was very helpful because he went through this, there's a code and explained what he did, but I still need to read it.
Is that the one?
I sent that one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I sent you a video on that one. This just would help me like really understand it. I don't remember. Let me see. Oh, no, I haven't. Wait, why does it say that I? Oh, geez, I did.
A lot of people still haven't here, right? Or-
Yeah, we're just.
There might be a lot of
This is
Yeah.
one, right?
There could be. We'll talk about homework for the first few minutes,
so well.
and I think that should help. Jonathan, could you dim the lights, please? We'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll let everybody catch up when they get here.
And Mark.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So today should be like a pretty easy day. We're just going to be doing some catch up. You guys will get a chance to review everything we've gone over in the whole course so far. And if you guys missed anything, now will be a day where you get to catch up. Few things. Welcome, guys. Come on in. Welcome. Okay, so a few things before we get started. We have made some changes in your groups. We may make more moving forward, but this is just kind of to get us working better as a team for all of us. So Gretel, you're going to be with Pedro. You are with Pedro. You two. Together, and then Martha, you, and then Fabian together also. You're with Fabian and then Sam.
Oh, so I'm not there?
Yeah, and then if you two guys want to work with them too, that's fine. Sounds good. So then Jose and John, you guys are
I thought he was gonna roll.
Team Falcon is still going strong.
We're no longer, we're missing the Falcon.
Yeah, I think you guys are doing well.
I guess. I don't know. Because he calls us a fun study group. I guess.
Okay, I missed everybody.
Yeah.
I don't like reading.
Okay, guys, welcome. Everybody get in new groups. Take another minute to finish that up. So, here are our objectives for the day. This is our class. Go over any lingering questions, right? Make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Anyone not clear what that means? Lingering questions. Somebody read number 2.
Outline the most important topics through today.
Outline the most important topics through today. So the most important things we've talked about. Outline Topics. Okay, somebody read number 3.
Break into groups for a heavily supported Cody session.
Okay. What do we think that means?
We're going to be coding.
We're going to be coding, and you guys are going to be breaking into groups and not your normal groups. You guys are going to get to break into new different groups just for this activity, which should be fun. Basically, you'll break into the groups for whichever activity you want to do. You'll have a choice of 4 activities to support you in different stuff. So you guys can just choose which activity you want to do and go to that group. Okay, any questions on any of this? Okay, I think you guys should be good. So before we get started on all of this, I would like you guys to do 2 things. One, if you could, we were supposed to do another poll thing like you guys did on Saturday, since I think you guys had some problems with the one you did on Saturday, right? Or some people? Some people had problems. So would you guys feel okay just slacking me the answer to some questions then? I'm just going to ask you guys for the top 4 things we've covered. So Bootstrap, slack me to 1 to 5 on how you're feeling on Bootstrap. Then JavaScript in general, slack me a 1 to 5. Everyone is listening to this because I need this information from everybody.
Wait, in the general channel?
And Tuesday, Thursday, or no, actually direct message it to me. Yeah, and that way it'll be private, only I will see it. So, okay, so we're going to say Bootstrap, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and jQuery. Those 5 things. Did everyone get that? Okay. So yeah, if you guys will just email those to me, and now we are going to watch a video on the homework while you guys are thinking about that and doing that.
Do you want us to send that now?
Yeah, go ahead and send it now. And I'll wait till everybody sends it to me and we can watch this homework. So this week's class is like basically a review class, but we will be going over timers. That's the one like additional thing that we'll cover this week, which is really a small thing. You guys could pretty much all learn that just by like Googling it, how the timers work. But that's what this week's class is supposed to be about. So I'll just go ahead and play this video. So hopefully you guys can multitask and slack me those things. Actually, I'll just take like 5 minutes. I'm going to take the next, 5 minutes, and I'll just wait for you guys to go ahead and slack me. Everything. I got it from a lot of you already.
Game, and it starts the counter ticking down. The counter here is set for 30 seconds for demonstration purposes. Obviously, you'll probably want yours to be much longer, depending on the questions you have. Probably around 120 seconds or so. But that timer is set low to illustrate that regardless of whether or not I answer all the questions and hit done.
Some of you are getting fancy and doing decimals.
Time remaining hits 0.
Like that.
Tells me I'm all done.
Oh,
and that I didn't even
wait. Okay, good. You thought you were going to see this first.
That I made. Okay, so go back. Now, if we go through the answers. And also notice that you can only provide.
Oh, dude, sorry. Yeah, but your CSS should be higher. I want to see that you're very hard.
Okay, so it looks like most of you are done with this. Take another couple minutes to finish up.
Yeah, don't worry.
There's no way we can do better than you. What? So at least
No, this is just something I'm doing. Yeah, so it's
Okay, are you guys good with that? Everyone done? Anyone not done? Okay, you guys are all done. Yeah, looks like you guys are all in pretty good places. I'm seeing a lot of 3s, a lot of 4s, some 5s. So that's pretty good. You guys are pretty much where we want you to be. I've looked at your homeworks. The homeworks all look pretty good. There's a few little nitpicky things that I'm seeing that I'll go over with you guys later on homework, but overall, it looks like you guys are doing pretty well. Like you're actually coding, you're actually writing code. It's working, it's doing what you want it to do. Like how does that feel, guys, to be actually writing code from where you were at a month ago? It feels pretty good, right? Yeah.
I'm still haunted by it.
It haunts you. Well, you'll get there. I mean, you'll get better. And like keep asking questions. What?
Well, I followed like 5 different tutorials. I worked a lot about it.
Yeah, I saw your Hangman game. You got it to work.
A lot of Googling.
Yeah, but you got it to work, right? I checked out your Hangman game. It was working. It works. You don't sound excited about it, though.
Because I still don't feel comfortable coding it from scratch
Mhm.
by myself.
Yeah.
Without Googling.
The confidence.
Like it took
of
me a
doing it,
long
yeah.
time to get there because I followed your video, I followed Daniel's videos, I followed 3 different tutorials, one of which was meant for kids.
Right. So that's okay. Well, I mean, you're learning. I think you guys are doing well. And the pseudo coding skills will come in handy. That's what's really going to get you coding things from scratch. Yeah. So keep going with this stuff, but you guys are doing really well. I think, in fact, we should give ourselves a round of applause for the doing so well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and watch this homework video. We'll take a little bit of time out of today's class to we'll get caught up. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. Jonathan, yeah.
This is the simple version of assignment. Fairly straightforward. Start the game, and it starts the counter ticking down. Counter here is set for seconds for demonstration purposes. Obviously, you'll probably do longer questions that probably seconds. But to illustrate that regardless of whether or not I all the questions and down at the bottom of the page, time remaining to 0. All done. Hey, okay, so back out.
So you guys see how this works, right?
Also notice that you only provide one question. That you can
Those are just radio.
done, and you calculate the right answer. I decided to make a somewhat 90s theme game here. You should feel free to use your game however you want, style it however you want. You should know enough.
Okay, I think we get the idea. Do you get the idea? That's radio. So you should have all of the So, good question. Um, no, we're gonna watch the I just wanted to give you. I think the advanced is. Jonathan, can
Here we have the more advanced version.
Okay, makes sense. Oh yeah, okay. Kind of the same if you guys sit on hand. Okay, does that make sense? Can you guys see how you would do that? So what I might recommend for you guys is do the that way you want to, or you can turn in. Realize to give extra credit. Okay, moving on. Any more questions on homework? Questions? Okay. So we are going to recap a little bit here. Would somebody like to read from me number one? What we're going to read? So I hope we're all. So who looked up the entire HTML5? Yep. Okay, all of the rest of you guys go to it's a good thing to know. A common job interview question will be like, can you name some of the HTML5? So we know that some has the view tag. The side is a good one. Canvas, yeah, canvas side. Audio is a good one. Also, video. What are some other HTML5? Article, yeah. What? Header, yeah. What's one more? Container, yeah. Section, yeah. All good answers. So, somebody read number two. So, are we all clear on this? Remember we talked about the 3 ways to improve stuff down? Anybody not remember? Everybody clear on the 3 ways? So we did inline style, how? If I say, I want style and this is, yeah. Right, you go within the tag and set the style attribute. There's no CSS selector, there's no code graphic. If we want to set an internal style sheet, we just put a style tag and then we put our CSS code inside it. That can go pretty much include it can go inside the head or it can go inside the body. Then we can also use a link tag. CSS file external. Somebody read number 3. No, you're on number 4. 3. Okay, so here on the team. 1 to 5. How are you guys on pads? Stuff is on your computers, folders. It's important. Just start it out. My dad, for instance, like he cannot learn like the folders on his computer. He's like he calls me and mom and they're like, but there's someone on the computer. The computer. I don't know what it is. But okay, that is rough. Okay, so remember. So I guess we started to do it now. Okay, so you're also on the show, everything is at half time and go back. And I do and that means class. And then if you want to get fancy, you can set up a hierarchy, right? So you can select all of the things of a certain class name, you can put them tag, or you can put them together. Does everybody know that part? That when they're separated by a space, it means the ancestor element and the child element, so you can specify a hierarchy, right? And then if they're not separated by a space, it means like an element that has that class or ID. So you can use all three of them together. You can see one of you can select one that ID. Good. I think we're on top of things. Okay, so let's read about this. Somebody read me number 1. Okay, so do we know why there's an advantage to it? Why it's advantageous? Somebody using how to use it. To keep the log of your work and your progress, that's one important reason. We can share those. So those are the two most important reasons. We keep track of what we're doing and we can share everything and that's definition. Okay, so what about number 2? Somebody read that. So how do we feel about that? I know a lot of you guys have struggled with this one, but it seems like it's pretty good at this now, right? How are we 1 to 5? It's the dash command. Everyone's got like about a 4. Everyone seems to be doing pretty well with it. We've struggled with it. Like, I mean, I even run into problems with this. Working. I use for my personal work. I use Bird a lot. You guys might want to think about doing that. It gives you a nice visual interface for your Git, and you don't have to use the command line stuff. But I think you're mostly doing pretty well with that. So somebody read number 2. So how do you guys feel about that? Pretty good. You guys all know this stuff, right? Yeah, I think we're good. And this number 4 got cut off for some reason, but it says understanding branching via Git, branch, checkout, and code. So this one we haven't had a chance to work with as much because we haven't really done branches. You guys are going to be that later. I wanted to make sure everyone was sort of study on doing different stuff. So you guys know now that you're a little bit skilled. Now you can try maybe playing with maybe different branches for different things. So if you have maybe making payments, you can try making on the future and then move it back in. Or if there's something new you want to try, you can try making information. Okay, awesome. Thanks for asking that. So forking means when you need something totally new. Branching, you branch out and then you merge back in. So typically that's using a company so they don't step on each other's toes. So if you have a new feature you're building, it'll make a branch for that feature. And you'll work on that branch, and then when you're done with it and everything is working nicely, then you'll merge it from the Forking means if you want to take a project and make it your own, make it something totally different. So like if you see there's an open source project that you could maybe use basis for one of your projects, you can fork it. And that means you're taking that as like a basis for your work and then making it into something totally different. Okay? Did everyone get that? Everyone clear on the difference between forking and branching? Yes? Okay. Sounds good. Let's see what else we have here. Bootstrap, mobile responsiveness. Somebody read number 1. Okay, so what is that? CSS library. Yeah, it gives you a whole bunch of CSS that you don't have to write yourself, that you can just use and leverage it the way you want to. It solves a bunch of problems for you. It solves the whole problem of having a grid framework. It solves like the way to style buttons, the way to style forms, a whole bunch of stuff that will just take up a bunch of your time every time you build a website and isn't that important. Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions on why we would use a CSS library that's pre-built or how it's working? We all understand that Bootstrap is written in CSS, right? And it's just like a layer of CSS that we use with our code. It works fundamentally the same way as the CSS we write would work. You guys all good with that? Okay, good. So number 2, somebody read bullet point number 2 for me.
Steps to improve CSS.
Okay, good. You guys all know how to do that. Okay, we're good with that. We know how to go to the CDN, get the link, put that in our code. We know all that.
Jonathan, are we going to stay in CSS 3.3 or should we start to migrate to?
So here's the thing you have to keep in mind when thinking about web standards and versions. It's all about backwards compatibility. Because they may have a new standard, but it's all about how well it works in the browser. So it's going to depend on your organization. It's going to depend on your target audience, what types of browsers they're using. I don't know. Like, I haven't researched the differences between 3.3 and 3.4 specifically. I don't stay on top of that stuff now as much as I should. But yeah, I would say there's enough in regular CSS3 to keep you guys busy, learn how CSS animations work, transitions, all that kind of stuff. So it won't really matter. In terms of you guys learning, there won't be a big difference. It'll all be the same. And then there's like a few extra features that they add in each version of CSS. So it's important to like stay well versed with that, I think, stay up to date on what they do and stuff. And then when you want to use one of those new features, you have to figure out if it will work in the browsers that you're targeting. Or at least how to make it degrade. If you want to say, like, because sometimes there's something that will work in Chrome and Firefox, but it won't work in Internet Explorer, say. So you can just figure out how to, in Internet Explorer, still give your visitors like a good experience, but maybe without that special thing. So maybe they can still see the site and it'll look good, but there just won't be like a special loading animation or something like that. That you're doing in CSS3. Did you have a question, Fabian? Oh. Okay, so could somebody read number 3 for me?
Process of dissecting out in Bootstrap grids.
Okay, how do we feel about this? Still a little confusing, right? I would imagine some of you are still a little confused. Do all of you know like how many columns in the Bootstrap grid? 12, right? And if I wanted to make a 3-column layout with even columns, I do 4. Yeah, each of them get 4 columns. I'll call LG4. So you guys are pretty good with this stuff. You need to practice a little more. But you've already only been doing it for a month. So I think you're doing well. So what's number 4? Somebody read for me.
General understanding of how to use Bootstrap components such as panels, jumbotron, navigation bars, and so on.
Okay, so how do we feel about this? Okay, let's say, yeah, let's do a 1 to 5 on everything. About a 4, 3. Okay, sounds good. So nobody's really like behind. Nobody's at a 1 on this. Has no idea how to do it. Okay, good. So a general understanding of media queries and mobile responsiveness. So you guys all did that fun homework, right?
Actually, one of the easiest part of this course.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy until you run into weird problems with it. But yeah, you just have different rules. So the stuff you want in your mobile layout, you put that in your mobile, add media query rule, etc. Yes, Nelson.
I have this problem before. I'm trying to overwrite this CSS property that is already used by Bootstrap.
Yeah, that's a common problem.
I'm doing the right way. Sometimes I'm trying to do it.
So you have a few different options when that happens, right? I can show you guys in the browser. It will be easier. Let me see what website I can go to. I'll use my Hangman game as an example because it has like no sign at all. So there should be some Bootstrap style here that I can override easily. Okay, so let's say like row here should be a good example. So these are defined in Bootstrap as part of the grid framework, right? And then, so if I write a style in my style sheet for .row, let's say, it won't probably take precedence of this. So I can write .row and then make it like margin left 10 pixels. So you'll know if it gets overridden because it will show up in Web Inspector as crossed out. In this case, it did not get overwritten because it's getting in the style, but you can do that a few different ways if you add another class to it. So when you see like one element is getting overridden by a Bootstrap style, you can add another class to it and put your CSS on that class that will override it. Another trick you can do is to put exclamation point important. This is kind of a hack. It's not the best way to do it because it's not always reliable, but you can always do that. And then it will always work. Important. Okay? Make sense?
I always try to go more specific.
And you can always try to go more specific too. So you have more granularity, drill down more. So you have more elements in the DOM that you're calling. So you could say like put a div tag or something before this row tag, and then it will be more, it will have more weight. Okay, makes sense. And this is kind of a confusing topic, but you guys will get the hang of it as you keep playing with it. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so we have some Bootstrap layout. So you guys all get it. These are rows. They get the row class. Then these are all. So if I wanted to do this layout, let's say, how would I do the first part? That would be called what? Okay, so that could be the navbar. Yeah, you're right. Or the header, more accurately. So that's the header, but it's how many columns wide? 12, right? And then we have these two columns. What does that look like? About a 4 and a 8, maybe? You guys think so? What do you think? 5 and a 7?
It's about a 4.
Okay, so a 4 and an 8. And then this bottom part, that's what? That's a 12 bar. It's the footer. Yeah, so I think you guys get the hang of this stuff. I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on it. So as we can see, it looks like that was a 6 and a 6 for that one. Okay, now JavaScript. It gets more interesting. Somebody read number 1.
Understand what purpose JavaScript serves in relation to HTML.
Great question. Who would like to answer that?
What is the question?
What purpose does JavaScript serve in relation to HTML and CSS? That's one purpose, but it's supposed to be like the interactivity layer, right? So HTML does information, and then CSS does presentation, and then JavaScript does interactivity. Right? Okay, so number 2. Somebody read.
Understand both.
Bless you. That's okay.
Understand both the uses and syntax for creating the below. Variables, arrays, also .log, alerts, counts.
For lives, functions, objects. So let's go through these one by one and put up our 1 to 5. Variables. You guys good? You guys should basically be at a 5 with variables. Okay, so a few things I wanted to mention with variables. Since we're all doing well with variables, there are some different syntaxes available to you. For variables, I would like you guys to start using. So variables can be declared separated by commas too. So most of you guys may be used to declaring your variables like this. So you do var x equals 1, var y equals 2, right? And have a semicolon at the end. What you can do instead is use the keyword var once, and then do x equals 1, comma, y equals 2, and you can declare as many variables as you want this way. So you'll see this done from time to time, so I wanted you guys to understand why you do it. So it's just the same thing. You can use the var keyword once and then declare all your variables that way.
If you just do var x, comma y, comma z, will it declare all of them undefined?
Yeah, you can do that too. So to declare all of them undefined, you just do that. Exactly. I think these comma separate is usually the better way. That's usually what good programmers prefer. I didn't want to introduce you guys to that right away because it might like confuse you, but that's usually the way you do it. So usually you'll have a list of your variables on top. Variables should always go at the top of the block, whatever it is, whether it's a function or maybe an if statement for loop. Variables should always go at the very top. You should figure out what your variables are going to be and put them at the very top, even if they're undefined, and then you can define them later. Okay. Let's move on to number 2, arrays. How do we feel about arrays? Guys are pretty good with arrays. Let's see your 1 to 5 on arrays. About a 5. Okay. Fabian, you're at a 2 on arrays. Okay. So can some of the teammates help Fabian understand arrays? What is an array? Sam?
So an array is a group of variables that are.
Is that, yeah, so an array is basically like a list. So if you want to have, say, like a list of things, whatever they are, we could have a list of vegetables, we could have a list of people's names. So do you have like a question then, Fabian, about arrays? Or okay, so that's another thing. We'll get to that. So, okay, so you're okay with arrays? You understand they're just like lists of things. And a variable can be what? Or an array can hold what, guys? Because we know this stuff by now. We know the 5 primitive data types, right? What are they? Numbers, string, undefined, Boolean.
Objects.
None. So objects are not a primitive. So we have these 5 primitive, right? You guys all know what they are. String, yeah, so you have string, number, Boolean, undefined, and null. Then on top of that, you can have arrays, you can have objects, and you can have functions. So those 8 data types are basically the types of values you can have in JavaScript. So an array can be any one of those things, any mixture of those things, right? You can have an array of arrays, you can have an array of objects, you can have an array of functions even. Okay, so let's move on to number 3. Somebody read number 3.
Console.log, alerts, confirms, and prompts.
Okay, how do we feel about these? Yeah, I get confused by the prompt and confirm. Confirm returns a Boolean. It says like, you want to do this, okay, and then it returns a Boolean. Prompt gives you like a text field, and it returns a string. But these things aren't used very widely. When you're making professional production websites, you'll very rarely use those. You'll usually have different ways of getting this data. Okay, so number 4. Somebody read if-then statements. How do we feel about these guys? We're at a 5. If one thing, do this thing. If another one, do something else. Okay. So, Emil, you're at like a 4. You look like you're thinking about it.
No, I get really confused because when I'm writing the code down, I think what really messes me up is the actual curly brackets.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they take me out of the actual block, and I feel like I just feel like I'm confusing those curly brackets when it comes to like the if and else and other statements.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether it's contained in the same block code or it's separate or like I don't even know where it starts or it begins sometimes.
Okay, so these are all good questions. It's like 2 things. You're not sure where the block starts and you're confused by your code. How many of you guys feel confused by your code? How many of you get lost in your code? I know I did only like all the time. Melvin, I'm sure you do too. So, okay, so a couple of things I noticed on homework that I wanted to talk to you guys about. I would invite all of you to check out JavaScript coding standards on W3 schools. Coding standards, JS W3. So this will give you a few good pointers. One thing, all of you guys go look up soft tabs in your text editor and how to set your text editor to do soft tabs. Your text editor should be putting 4 spaces per tab that you hit. The tab is actually a different character than a space. So you should always be using soft tabs or spaces instead of tabs in your code documents. Yeah, Sam. It's just the standard. It's because a lot of people will look at code. They want it to be formatted the same way. So that way, when you work across an organization or work with different people, sometimes they would have the tabs done different ways. And it's just kind of annoying when you get somebody else's code and you have to work with it and then you have to set the tabs back to your way of doing it. So the standard is to use 4 soft tabs or 4 spaces per tab. Yeah, but the tab is like a separate character. So it's a different character value than the 4 spaces. So even though it's doing the same thing, it's a different like character value. Yeah, so there's a way, if you guys use Sublime Text, you can just look up like Sublime Text set soft tabs or, you know, VS Code or whatever your text editor of choice is. Just look up how to do that. And then another thing I would suggest for you guys is to turn on showing white spaces, which will show you a little grayed out like dot for every space or a little arrow thing for every tab. So that way you can actually see what your white space is. Show white spaces, yeah. For your text editor. So email, that should help you. Also, I saw that a number of you guys did not correctly indent your code. Some did not correctly indent HTML. Others did not correctly indent JavaScript. So that would be a good thing to do too. Make sure your code is correctly indented. There are tools that will do this for you built into your text editor, so you can look up how to use that. There's an online one called JS Beautify. So if you look up like JS Beautifier, you'll see that you can just type in your JS code into here, and it will automatically add in all the right indentations and spaces and stuff for you. I could show you guys how this works with, well, you guys can try it out on your own. You'll see how it works. But always use something like this or make sure you're indenting your code right. Another thing I saw some of you guys doing is you would put like an if statement, like here, let me bump this up. So you would have an if statement like this, and then some of you are going down to the next line to put your brackets and then not indenting stuff. So you would just put like some code here like that without indenting it. So don't do that. We want everything to be correctly indented. The bracket goes here on this side of this space, etc. So if you have everything indented correctly, that should help mitigate the factor of you getting lost in your code. It will still happen. It still happens to the best programmers, but it will stop it from happening. Another thing that will really help with that is write self-documenting code. Write small functions like I showed you guys when I went over the homework. Give them nice long names that describe what they are and make everything really small. Another kind of mistake that I saw some of you doing was you were putting things like for loops inside of if statements. You should never do that. If you have like a lot of logic, like a for loop, that should go in its own function. Functions should basically always do one thing if you can, and that will help mitigate a lot of the confusion. Okay. And you guys are going to get confused a little bit as you learn. That's normal, so don't worry. Okay, so we were at what? If-then statements. So somebody read number 5. For loops, how do we feel about these? Yeah, okay. I think you guys are pretty good. Fabian, how do you feel about for loops? You're also at like a 2. Okay, team. So you guys get to help Fabian get caught up. Okay, don't let him leave without knowing this stuff. Okay, did you have a question on for loops, Fabian? Can we help you? Okay, so let's, yeah, okay. So let's pretend you guys, you are all in a job interview with me and I ask you, so for loops, what do those do? Like, what's the answer? What would you say? Anyone? Yeah. Jose. So it iterates through an object. It doesn't help it pretty much. It does it. Can anybody else give a definition? What would you say if you're at a job interview, you got that question?
For each instance of something.
What does a for loop do? Yeah, so it does something for each instance of an object. It's a mechanism in JavaScript meant to do to repeat an operation over and over again, right? So, and you don't always have to use it on an array. Let's say I just want to do something 5 times. Like if I want to write the same thing to the document 5 times, I could use a for loop for that too, right?
Is loops through a block of code a designated number of times? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's something to do to repeat a set of steps a given amount of times. Yeah. So yeah, that would be like the correct job interview definition. I would say it's a mechanism within JavaScript to repeat a set of steps a given amount of times. It's usually, and then you could say like it's usually used for arrays or for other things, or if you just want to do something a certain amount of times. Fabian, does that make sense to you? Like there are times in programming where you want to repeat the same steps a certain amount of times and then maybe change one thing each time?
I remember examples you changed last time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like more abstract. Formulated, put it into an entire task. So that I figure it all the things.
Okay.
All the concepts.
Right.
I don't understand them individually.
Okay, so, but you know a for loop does the same set of instructions a number of times. And so there are three things. And the more you see this stuff, the more you'll start to remember it. But does anyone remember the three arguments we pass into a for loop? Yeah, so variable I equals 0, that's one. What's number two?
Condition greater or equal to.
Yeah, so then it's greater or equal to something. So if we want to do something 5 times, we say I is less than 5. And then what's the third thing we do? I plus plus, and that adds to I. So does that make sense, Fabian? We have a counter. We start the counter usually at 0, but we get to choose what we start the counter at. So that's the first part we're passing in here. So we will do, let's just get back to this. So I would do something like 4. So then the first thing I do is I have a counter, which we call I for index usually. So I set my counter at 0 usually. You can set it at whatever you want. Usually you want to set it at 0. Then we want to do something less than a given amount of time. So we're saying while I is less than this number, keep doing that. So that means keep doing this 5 times. So we're going to count it and then I plus plus. So that means add 1 to the counter, right? Does that make sense to you, Fabian? So it's like you have a counter. It's kind of like you're swimming laps, right? And you have a counter. So you swim 1 lap, you hit the counter, it adds 1 to the counter. Then you swim another lap, it adds 1 to the counter, right? So you can think of it like that. If you've ever seen that, like a lap counter. When you're swimming, it starts at 0, then you swim a lap, and as you get to the end of the pool, you hit the counter, right? And then it goes up 1 to 1. You swim across the pool again, it goes up to 2. Yeah.
What confuses me still is the equal signs. You know, the 1 equal sign, 2 or 3.
1.
Where you want to start your sequence. The 0. So if you.
No. He's
saying
assigning versus comparing.
Yeah.
Strict or not strict.
Oh, okay. So the triple equals versus the double equals? Okay, we'll get to that. That's like a separate topic, so we can get to that, and we can talk about that more. Okay, so hopefully this is starting to make more sense to you, and you guys will get lots more opportunities to practice for loops. Fabian, how do you feel? Okay.
How does it differ from the for in loop?
We will talk about for in loop. So there's lots of different ways to loop over things in JavaScript. We'll get to for in later, as well as for each and map and a bunch of other ways. But for now, we just want to make sure you guys are good with the for loop. Basically, for in, to give you like a quick overview, for in is for objects. So you loop with the keys as well as the values for that. But I don't want to get too into that so everybody doesn't get confused. Yeah.
My editor has here when I tap the for and I click hit tab, it completes the function and it says let I something.
Yeah, so that's a newer standard. Let is sort of similar to var, so just change that to var. So you have in JavaScript 6, ECMAScript 6, you have a couple different ways to declare variables. You can declare something as a constant, or you can do let, which just works within the current block. It's scoped differently, but don't worry about that because we're still learning JavaScript scope. So to learn how let is scoped differently than var is still kind of confusing for us right now. So I would say use var instead of use let for right now, because then it will work in all browsers. Make sense to everyone? Okay, awesome. So what's the next thing, number 6? Any other questions? Well, any other questions on for loops before I? Okay. Functions. How do we feel about functions? Functions are what? Somebody give me a job interview definition. Reusable snippets of code, reusable blocks of code.
I have a question.
Yeah,
about
sure.
Functions. I'm actually, I get a little confused with the actual arguments that go within that function.
Okay, so we can talk about that. So the arguments, let's talk for a minute about arguments. Who can explain how arguments work? If you had to walk into a job interview or something, let's say, and I asked you this question, who feels comfortable with arguments? Okay.
They're a placeholder for a variable that will be used within the function?
Yeah, they're like a placeholder for a variable. They're technically different than a variable, but they work the same way. So you can say, so say you know your function is going to need some type of information, right? Like let's say I have an add function that takes two numbers and adds them, right? So I'm going to do var add equals function, and then I know it's going to take what? Two numbers, right? And then it's going to add them together. So I'm going to put like number 1 and then number 2. And then this function is going to return number 1 plus number 2. Is this making sense? So I just have two arguments. I'm defining them here in the parentheses, and then I'm using them to do stuff with them here in the body of the function. Now, when I call this function, I just have to call them in the right order, and it will do what I want to. So if I add like 5 and 6, and they're separated by commas, obviously. So 5 and 6 makes 11.
Would it be not a number? It would just add the types together.
Yeah, so there are ways to get confused. So yeah, if I made it like not a number, it would add it together. But that's more a question about how the plus sign operator works in JavaScript than how the arguments work. So
it's just like a variable placeholder.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a placeholder for a value. Technically, it's not really a variable because it can do the same thing sort of as a variable. But it's a placeholder for a value.
You have to define the two arguments and figure out, you know, what is the number or is it a string or anything like that?
No, you don't. You can. JavaScript is very loose and other languages will check for you to make sure things are the right type. If you want to do type checking in JavaScript, you have to do it yourself. So what I could do here is put like an if statement to make sure. I could say if number 1 is not, you know what I mean, type of number 1 does not equal number, then return or something. So I would have to do the type checking on my own. JavaScript won't do that for you. It just tries to do its best following the instructions that you give it, and if there's an error, it will throw an error. So I could say like type of number 1 equals number, then do this. That's how I would do the type checking if I wanted to. Make sense? Okay.
Professor,
yeah.
I have a global variable called number 1. Can I use that number 1 inside the function argument?
Sorry, say that again, Nelson.
If I have a global variable called number 1, that's an example, can I use that number 1 as an argument for my function?
No. So if you have something that's already defined as a variable, then you can call it from inside your function if it's available in the current scope, which depends on the scope. But when an argument will always be scoped to that function, so it won't be accessible from outside of that function. So yes.
So if I have, like, for example, a variable called width and one height, and I have a variable with a function that finds the area, I couldn't just put add width and height, for example, or multiply whatever, and then get the result. Would that not work?
Yeah, so it would work. And you're going to, typically in programming, you're going to mix together variables and arguments. They're not the same thing, variables and arguments, but they both do fundamentally the same thing in that they're containers for values, right? So sometimes an argument will make sense to use as a container for a value if you're only going to use it within that function. If another function's calling it, that's going to pass in that value. Sometimes it will make sense to use a variable for a container as a value, mostly if multiple functions are using it. Or sometimes you'll want to make separate containers, like just to make things more organized. Sometimes you can just use arguments, but it makes sense to break it down into variables just to make your code more readable. There are also different styles of coding. So JavaScript comes from what's called a paradigm or a style of coding called functional, which has a lot to do with the way that you pass values as arguments from one function to another. Now, as JavaScript got more popular, people started bringing over styles of coding that they had learned from other languages and started doing that. Mostly object-oriented programming, where values are sort of stored in a more centralized kind of place, and then accessed from that either by accessing a property of an object or by accessing a variable. So there are different styles of coding that do this stuff in different ways. In a lot of cases, you'll find there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's no right or wrong answer for everything. But you guys will just have to kind of play with it and find out what works for you, what coding examples you like better, all that kind of stuff. But you guys sort of now see the difference between variables and arguments. The arguments get passed in with a function, right? Mappy? No?
I just don't know what the rule of thumb is when you either add an argument within the parentheses. That's just what kills me. Like, I don't know when I'm supposed to do that.
Okay, so there is no real rule of thumb until you guys get into learning about more advanced like styles of programming, like if you start reading about functional programming specifically, or things like that. So what's going to support you is learning about that stuff probably sooner. And if any of you, I would actually like to recommend a resource. It's called Mr. Frisbee's Mostly Adequate Guide to JavaScript Programming. And this, yes, everybody look this up on your computer. Mr. Frisbee's Mostly Adequate Guide to Java, or Professor Frisbee's Mostly. And this actually is a real computer science professor, and his real name is Frisbee. Yeah, I think so. Pretty sure. Adequate Guide to Programming, and it has a skunk on it. So everybody go bookmark that, read it on your own. Try not to get confused by it because it is pretty advanced and it will be covering some advanced topics. But this will give you one style of how people like pass in arguments and make programs work with arguments in a really good way that makes sense. A lot of the programs you find in JavaScript don't really make a whole lot of sense, and people just make kind of arbitrary decisions about things like that, where to use arguments and where to use variables, and don't think about it a whole lot. Yes?
Like the way I like to think about it is it's like a reference. Like when you're doing a function, the argument points to the value that you're giving the function. If you're going to do, like, for example, multiplication of two variables that already exist, maybe you don't need to use an argument. But if you're going to do a function that takes this variable and multiplies it times whatever number, then you do an argument for the second number. You can do a function multiply x as the first argument and then 4 as the second argument, because you're going to multiply that variable times 4. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, exactly. It's just like, that's the way I like to think of it.
Right. Yeah, as you keep practicing, it'll make more and more sense to you. Yeah, Russ?
I've heard you say first class object. Say that's object, but what is the
no, what I've said, I think you misheard me. What I said are functions are first class citizens. So in JavaScript, a function can be a value in the same way that a number or a string or a primitive data type can be a value. In other languages, that's not the case, and functions get treated differently than other primitive data types. In JavaScript, they get treated the same way, which is where that sort of name as a first-class citizen comes from. Okay, so let's move on. We have a lot to cover. I want to make sure that you guys have enough time to do your individual exercises too. And we are actually, I want to finish this page and then we'll go to break and we can come back and finish reviewing and then you'll do your individual exercise. So let's go to objects. How do you guys feel about objects? They're a little bit more confusing, right? You guys at a 5? You don't even know where to start. Okay, so Fabian's at a 0. So somebody tell Fabian, like say a job interview definition for a JavaScript object.
Value pairs, each value has a name which is correct.
Mm-hmm. And then the value is?
And then I wrote objects can group together different variables that belong together and have no particular order.
No, because variables mean a specific thing in JavaScript. You think it's easy to confuse variables and values because variables are a container for values, but there are other kinds of containers for values too, like arguments or like properties of an object. So they're technically not variables, they're values. So it's good to learn to make that distinction.
So it's just values and properties.
Yeah, but you started off really well. So objects are a collection of key value pairs. So we talked about arrays, right? Arrays are just a list of different values, right? Which could be any of the 8 types of values we have in JavaScript. You have objects, you have arrays, you have functions, then the 5 primitive data types, strings, numbers, etc. So an array is a list of any combination of these, right? Objects get a little bit more structure because they have labels. When you get items out of an array, you do it by the number. So if you want the first item of an array, you do what, guys? Yeah, array index 0. So objects work by using a label. So instead of saying, so it's kind of like, say you have a list of things, right? And so you can say, hey, get me the first thing on the menu, or get me the second thing on the menu, right? But then sometimes that's hard because there's too many things or it's hard to differentiate them. So that's why we have labels. Objects give labels to each of the values that are in a list. So would anybody like to help and try to offer a different explanation to Fabian, TAs? Okay, Melvin.
With arrays, it's kind of like a list of things that belong to one category. So, for instance, think vegetables for a moment. Your array would be vegetables, and in that array, it's just a bunch of different ones: carrots, zucchini, whatever. Objects would be if you were to pick one of those vegetables and list off the characteristics of that one. So, for instance, say we have carrots, color is orange, weight, average is like an ounce, whatever the case is, and so forth. You're giving different characteristics of one individual item.
Yeah, I like that example.
So, John, is it correct to say then that arrays are important because they have an order, whereas an object is more literal? For instance, like the name is John and the last name is Smith. Is that
right? Yeah. So objects are literal. You get the first name, last name. Object literal is actually what?
Quantitative versus qualitative.
I don't know if I would go that far as to say it's quantitative versus qualitative. But yeah, no, it is. In a way, it is because you're just looking at the quantity versus you're looking at qualities. I don't know if there's like a direct parallel to science where they'll talk about qualitative versus quantitative, but you could say that, yeah. So let's look for Fabian. Let me write this example. Cucumber. I just want to write out this example of different vegetable. I don't know if I spelled it right, but that's okay. So Fabian, this would be an example of an array. So if I wanted to get lettuce out of this array, how do I do this, guys? No, just to get lettuce, to have it give us back lettuce. Brackets, and then 1. So this gives me lettuce. So I can get stuff out of this array by giving it an index, starting at 0. So to get the first item, I do my array, and then the square brackets 0. So I'm saying give me something back from my array based on what its position is in the array. Things in the array are indexed. You get them back. You know what they are based on their position. With an object, they have keys instead. Everything has labels. So I could do this. So I would make like the label carrot, and then I would list off some properties about the carrot, right? Right. So this would be another object, and then I could give it properties. Or I could just say carrot and then have it be like a string or a number or whatever it is. Is this making sense, Fabian? Okay, well, let's press on, and everybody try to work together to answer each other's questions, okay? Make sense? Do you have any questions? Anything you could put into like a question about what's not clear to you? Yeah, practice makes perfect. Okay, so we have one more, guys, and then we're going to break. Scope. Save the best for last. Where are you guys at? 3s, 2. Okay, perfect. It's kind of like people say if you say you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. You're just trying to sound cool and smart and everything. But yeah, quantum physicists don't understand quantum physics. JavaScript programmers don't really understand JavaScript scope. They just kind of pretend to. So yeah, you guys should be at like about a 2 or a 3. It will get even more confusing when we start talking about JavaScript closures and functions that return functions and fun stuff like that. So yeah, we've got lots more fun stuff to confuse you guys. Any questions on JavaScript scope before we break?
Will we go into the execution stack more and how?
We may. I haven't seen that in the course yet. That doesn't mean that it's not there. Debugging things, you won't learn about that much about the execution stack the same way as you would with other languages. And a lot of times when you're using libraries, the execution stack will just be referencing different things in the library that aren't really important to you or getting your application to work. So yeah, it's not really that important. One thing we will be getting into using more is the JavaScript debugger, which will help you find problems in your code. I think you guys covered this on your Saturday class a little bit, right? Yeah, so you can go into your JavaScript, you can set breakpoints, you can do different stuff to debug. So that part we're going to go into in pretty great detail. So like you can put a breakpoint here and then it will stop when it's doing stuff and show you. So this allows you to find problems in your code. Okay, any more questions? You guys ready to go on break? Okay. You look confused. Yeah.
I take notes. That's correct. On my notes for objects and properties.
Yeah, objects and properties. Objects have key value pairs, which means that each value has a name, which is then the key. Yeah.
But then I wrote objects can group together. Is that not correct? Should I take that out?
Well, I would say like each key has a name which points to the value. That actually makes sense. So each key is a name which points to a value.
So take this all out then?
Yeah, I would say, which means that each key is a name which points to a value.
Sorry, which?
Each key is a name which points to a value.
Each
is a name which points to a
name which. And then delete my second sentence.
Objects can group together different values.
Oh, no wonder. Okay, values belong together and have no particular order, whereas array have an order.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Arrays are important. I would say that they're all important. Arrays are different.
Okay.
Because they have an order. Yeah, that looks good, Jackie.
Well, I just started. It's the dice. Yeah.
So I guess.
I don't know if I called it a posting so bad. I just started.
Alright, this is when I think there was.
So I did, I'm starting with the scores, the round scores, and put in the dice, and then the scores are 0, you have to pair it, and then the dice.
So I was able to see some siren, but I still can't figure out why it's not thinking anything is correct.
Okay. So.
Yeah, probably.
And I also don't think that I don't think that these are calculating correctly. Because at one point it brought up a 2-letter word, and I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, let me see. I'll try to take a look and fix it. So did you see what I sent you last night?
I did, and I tried putting it into my code.
Yeah, so where's that one function that I sent you? Like,
and I know this is not this is the wrong game actually. Here. Like I replaced what I had there. And then I also wanted to ask, like, where do you find audio to film it?
Oh, okay. So you gotta just go online. Like if you look up sound effects online, you can just find stuff and download it. Yeah. Yeah, there are a bunch of websites. But so you did this update. So do you have this function in your code then? And this one? Yeah. So that's what you want to check for. Do you actually have those functions? And is it giving you an error at all?
Not that I know of.
So let's do it for so I want to
Okay, so try like typing a letter.
Checked something in here.
Oh yeah, you can do that. Like
to see
so.
if my words were actually working, and it knows what word it is.
Yeah. So if you type word, like do you remember what you named the variable for the current word? Word. Okay, so type in word and see what it says. Okay. So cookie, is that even the right? No, so that's not the right. And then okay, so these are the ones that you list. So it's not doing that. So let's go back to your code and see if we can. In fact, let's use sources tab because I want you to get practice doing it this way. So what you can do, this will help you a lot to figure out our sources. And then go to here, what you can do is set like breakpoints for the different so yeah, you can set breakpoints for the different things you want to do. Like this is the function that's getting the blank word. So now when I restart it, it should go and try to get a blank word, and then it's going there. So you're giving it the length of 6, right? So it tells you here what the parameter that was passed in, the argument that was passed in. So you declare this length argument, and then it will tell you here that, hey, you're calling this function, and the length is 6. Because I told it to break here, so
and
we'll
it
stop.
Should have been 6 because the word is cookie, right?
Yeah, I think the word, it tells us word here. So we can actually just type word. If it's still cookie, then it should be 6. Yeah, okay, so it's still cookie. So it should be 6. So you're saying I is 0, I is less than length, I is plus. So this should, I think the length minus 2 was 6. Right, so we had, okay, I see what your problem is. I had put on this part, the slice, to get rid of the trailing space, and then I realized that it would be too hard to do the other part, figuring out where to put the correctly guessed letter with the spaces if they had like a space to separate this. And I think that should be an underscore too. I hit the underscore instead of a dash. Doesn't really matter, but just put it back. But yeah, you just need to return results because you don't need this last part. I put this in when I did my example, and then I realized it. So if you just do that, that should work. So let's. Oh no, so we have to go.
Then that would also.
Comedy show.
Oh.
Made by 2 It's on Comedy Central, but you can.
Yeah. You understand what I'm saying, right? I did have the spaces in between separating the underscores, and then I decided to get rid of them. So then I found out I didn't need that slice part to get rid of the last.
Yeah, I didn't like that space either.
Yeah, you can just do it with CSS. You should do things with CSS whenever you can. They say. Okay, so now it's giving me like a bunch of spaces. Let's see what I want to see. Okay, ice cream. So that's 1, 2, 3. CREAM. Yeah, that's right.
Over and over again with IG.
So it still doesn't know what's correct.
Right. So I think your functions are named wrong. So look, we can go in and see here. Let's see this area. So then you have your handle correct. Let's say from handle key press, and I'll show you how this works. So this gets fired when you do a key press. It will go to here. Oh, okay. So you're getting an error there. Unexpected. Wait.
I think you just entered a G.
Oh, did I? Okay. Yeah. So get blank word. Okay, so this blank works. Okay, so now it steps into here. So these are the controls for the debugger. You guys will have probably a whole class in this, I imagine. So this one like steps over, and just steps to the next line. And then some lines will be calling functions, so you can step into the function. So you can see here the guess was incorrect, right? So it's going to go into this handle incorrect letter guess. That part is working. Okay, so let's try a correct letter. Okay. So then we're going to step over. We're going to see if it checks it. So I think your check letter part is not working. So let's go to the so check.
Tomorrow I have
Okay. So we're gonna return. You have your word. You're passing in a letter greater than -1, and then check letter already shows. Return letters guess that index of is greater than 1. Yeah, so you have letters guessed, and then but no. So wait, where's the other one? Check. The first checker I checked.
Check letter.
Yeah, okay, so check letter. And it isn't check letter, so it hasn't been already checked, right? You're saying that the letter is in the word and it hasn't been already checked. Okay, so check letter already shows it. Check letter already shows it. Letters, yes, index of letters. Oh, I know where you're from. You're doing lowercase letters instead of uppercase letters. So what you need to do,
They raise the prices of everything, but they don't raise
handle.
So you're just
One thing I
the cost of living here is high and the salaries have increased. The median salary is.
so you can basically format your JavaScript so that it will like correct everything. I don't remember.
I made a note to just how to do it.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how to do it on the fly, but you can just do this if you look up like JS. You can just use the online one too. I hate this one. There should be an easier way to do it too. Okay, so we have that. Paste that in. It just looks a little bit thinner. Okay, so we're going to want to handle key guess equals event dot key dot to uppercase, because all of the words should be, are the words in there right? Uppercase or lowercase? Yeah, sometimes it's just little annoying stuff that you forget to think of like that. So I think what was happening was all of the letters were going in lowercase. So they have to be. So let's see. Let's try it like that now. And then I think we're going to start on the other. Okay, we can take a look after. See, go to your console though. Let's see if anything is coming up. Oh, the reason I know why it's not working, you still have those breakpoints there. So if you're pressing a key, it should be taking you to your sources tab. No? So if you press a key, it should go to there now. No? Is there an error? No, that's weird. So if you press a key, it's not doing anything. Oh, because you're there. So click in there. It has to have focus. That's one thing. Okay, so now we take out these two breakpoints. Sorry, Jackie, I'll try to answer the question later. Okay. So now you can hit this play button. That will just play through and make it not stop and debugger. Debugger pauses it and then play lets it play through. So now let's see. Do we get anything? Is this still ice cream? Okay. Yeah, use this debugger and see if you can debug it more. You're getting close though. You're almost there.
But now it doesn't know that I'm.
You gotta click in here to let it know. And now it's not doing anything. Go to console. Okay. We can look at this more after. I want to get started again, but we'll figure it out. You're close. Okay, everyone. How's it going? You guys ready to get back to it? Everybody got their buddies? Okay, we're going to get started. Snaps. Okay, JavaScript continued. Do you guys want to continue with this stuff? You are going to have an opportunity to practice your skills with your group. So I want to go through this stuff pretty quickly. For the rest of these, I'm just going to have you guys read these off one by one, and then we're going to do our 1 to 5s. And if we have any questions, we'll ask them. So are you guys ready? Can we do this quickly? Okay, start. Number 1.
Understand how to organize a JavaScript program in regards to global variables, functions.
Okay, so this one we haven't talked about a lot yet, but are you guys sort of starting to see how this works? Some variables you'll need for your whole program, you make those kind of globally accessible in your scope, and this sentence actually isn't written well. You should never really have global variables in your scope except for if they're namespaces, because they might conflict with other libraries and stuff. So you shouldn't be using global variables as a normal everyday way of doing business. Typically, if you're doing things in a good way, now you guys are just learning, so you will use the global namespace a little bit. But you guys kind of understand the flow of all this stuff. Yeah, Sam.
So the way we've kind of been doing it is just putting everything into a document.onClick.
Yes, for the jQuery programs, you have been doing things that way. That's a very common way. You'll see things done with jQuery programs. It isn't necessarily a good way, but it's the way things, yeah. So it's not really a good way. The good thing about it is that it fires all of your code right at the document.ready event, which kind of gives you some good control over when code fires. Normally, it would fire either on the onload event or when the script loads, so you have less control that way. There's ways to get even more control and make your page load faster, which we could get into later. But another alternative way you guys have, if you don't want to put all your code inside of a code block with the document.ready, you can make that a function and then pass that function into your document.ready event binding. Does that make sense? Yeah, like if you have a game and you have a start game function, you could just pass in the start game function to the document.ready and have it call that, and then that will go and call the other thing.
Oh, I just put everything in.
Yeah, a lot of people do it that way, even like professionally, but it can be organized better. Okay, let's move on. Number 2.
Be able to use all JavaScript code to capture key clicks.
Be able to use old JavaScript code to capture clicks. I don't even know what that means. Let's move on to number 2.
Be able to use old JavaScript code to generate JavaScript.
Okay, so I guess by old, they must mean not jQuery. Yeah, but they could have put that like as use regular JavaScript. It's not really old. It's the current way we're still doing things. So Yeah, let's not even worry about that stuff. I want you guys learning jQuery first, so you'll understand how things work at a high level, and then you can look at how to learn things in JavaScript. So jQuery, somebody read number 1 in jQuery.
Be able to explain why we might use a JavaScript library like jQuery.
Okay, can you guys all do that?
Faster.
It's faster, it makes stuff easier, it gives you control over the DOM. What are you guys gonna say when you walk into a job interview though, and they say, so jQuery, what does that do? You can save time. You can use it to save time. That's good. Here's a better answer. jQuery is a library for DOM traversal and manipulation. If you go to the site, that's what it says. Traversal, meaning that you can traverse the DOM. You can go to, say, this div and then go 3 down, get the child of that and the child of that and the sibling of that. So you can get to pretty much anywhere you want to within the structure of your HTML document. And you can get the information from that, right? You can find what is the content of a tag. You can find what is a given attribute of a tag. Then, in addition to being able to traverse it and get information from it, you can also change stuff, right? You can manipulate it. You can add in new tags. You can delete tags. You can change class names. You can change CSS styles. You can do a whole bunch of stuff, right? So that's what jQuery does. It abstracts DOM manipulation and traversal, primarily. Okay, so does that make sense to everyone, first of all? Everyone at like a 5 with DOM manipulation, traversal? Gretel, you're making a funny face. What, are you okay? Do you understand what we're talking about? What is DOM manipulation? Oh, you can't see from that far. Why don't you come closer? You're allowed to come closer. You don't have to sit in the No? Okay, yeah, come. Okay, so somebody read number 2 then.
Be able to explain what the jQuery $ processing parentheses syntax means.
So can we do that? Can we explain what the $ is?
Selector.
It's the selector, so that's one thing, yeah. What else can it do? It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It actually does multiple things. Anybody know? So let me explain this again. jQuery is what they call an overloaded function. So what does overloaded function mean? It means that it can do multiple things based on the type of data that you give it. So if I pass in HTML code to the jQuery function, what does it do? Anyone know? It creates that HTML that I gave it, right? And where does it create it? It creates it in the memory of our JavaScript interpreter. The JavaScript engine that runs in the browser creates it, but it doesn't talk to the HTML part of our browser yet, right? So it creates a new element, doesn't put it in the document yet. When I pass in CSS selector code to the jQuery function,
it creates an array of all the elements.
Yeah, there we go. Did everyone get that? You creates an array of all of the elements that match that CSS selector. So if I put in an A as my CSS selector, it's going to get me what? All the links. So I get a list of all of the links in there. If I put dot my class, what do I get? All the elements for the class of dot my class. If I put in a dot my class, what do I get? A list of all the anchor tags of my class. Right? So what else can I give the jQuery function? Anybody want to take a guess besides CSS? I can, well, it can do effects, but we're talking, Gretel, right now about what can I pass in between these parentheses.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's classes, IDs?
Yeah, you can pass IDs, classes, any type of CSS selector. You can pass HTML. Some other things you can give to it. Those are the two main ones that you guys really need to know. Some other things that are sort of just side caveats, you can pass it a function. What does it do when you pass it a function? It acts as a document.written. So just doing this dollar and put a function inside it, inside the parenthesis, does the same thing as what you guys have been doing with document.written. So that's just a shortcut. You guys will see that in code when you inherit code from other people. You'll see that. Pretty typically, if you see a function passed into that, that means it's doing document fetching. Some other things you can give it XPath, which is another way to traverse the DOM. It's just another way to give a path to a certain part of your HTML document. It comes from XML. It's not really as widely used, but it is a thing you can still use. You can use your jQuery XPath. So we all know what this dollar syntax means, right? Basically, we pass in HTML. It creates the HTML for us in memory and doesn't add it to the document yet. If we pass in CSS, it goes and finds the HTML that matches that CSS selector. Do we know how to capture jQuery button clicks, though? Button clicks. Like if you click a button, do we know how to bind an event to a button in the DOM? .on or .click. Has anyone gone to check the difference between? Well, actually, no. .on and .click do what? The same thing, right? Exact same thing. One is just a shortcut to the other, and that does what? It binds an event, right? So it's kind of like we're setting a sentinel, a listener, as they call it, to just sit there as long as it takes and listen until something happens. Then when it does happen, it comes and gets us and has us do something else. And we call that what? The thing that an event, yeah, and the function that event does, we call that a callback. Right. Okay, you guys are on top of it. We're going to keep moving. Somebody read number 4.
Provide a few examples of jQuery methods for change.
Okay, so what does this mean even?
So instead of doing something like .click, you can .text to generate a particular.
Yeah, so we can use jQuery and JavaScript to change HTML in response to code. So the plain JavaScript way of doing this was what? We do like our document .get element by ID. We pass in an ID, and we save that as a variable. And then to the variable, we do that thing .inner HTML. Equals, it's not a method, but it's a property that we're setting. So we use equals. In jQuery, it's just the text method, right? Everyone good with that? Okay, next slide. So guys, now it's your turn. Spend a few minutes looking over the topics we've covered, then write down any of the following. We're going to take 3 minutes for this. Okay, you guys are going to do this. Write down 2 questions. We're going to limit it to 2 questions, whatever is on your mind, whatever is troubling you. Whatever you haven't figured out, if you don't know where to start, just start with the first thing that comes into your head. But part of learning to be coders and part of learning to be effective professionals is going to be learning to phrase your questions in a professional way. So you guys have the opportunity here to practice that skill, right? Because it is a skill to ask questions. You guys won't always know the answers to things. You'll need more information, and you'll need to get that information and still kind of sound smart, right? And seem knowledgeable. So you have the opportunity here to practice your skills at making your questions sound better. So try it. Even if you know like absolutely nothing about a subject, see how much you can learn from somebody. See like how good you can get quickly by asking questions. Okay? So everyone, we're going to take 5 minutes with this exercise. Write down the questions and ask your teams. All in 5 minutes. You guys think you can do it? Let's try it. You guys got your question?
That way, you can direct everything from your JavaScript, right? So, different ways that I'll use. To change the code. The same variable. Yeah, no,
And then.
Because if JavaScript isn't displayed, it's stored in so it's like, what is said about the problem is that JavaScript is run. Because it's composite, so it's gonna run the first. So it doesn't reset. It's gonna run the second one, whatever it said. So right there, what you did is the second And I mean, if you have a single processing files, we can put a stop at one, so it stops it automatically, and it stops the second. The console here, you can do
Okay, you guys have 1 more minute. Okay, who wants to take another 5 minutes to answer questions? Raise your hands. A couple of you, a few more hands. Or who wants another 5 minutes for questions? You guys good? Okay. A few of you do. Tell you what, we'll take another 2 minutes since only a few of you want it. Hey, Melvin and Yamil, maybe you guys can work together since neither of you are partners. Cool? What? I said maybe work with Yamil since neither of you guys are working with anyone. Work together. Yamil, work with Melvin. With Melvin.
I spoke to one of
Okay, guys, let's finish your sentences, finish your paragraphs. Okay, guys, snaps. Great job. You guys had some good questions. That was a productive 7 minutes. How do we feel about our questions? Our answers, 1 to 5. Few of us are not answering. Okay, so did you guys get some questions answered? Do you have more stuff that you know you want to talk about now? How many people are going to continue their conversations to after class? Yeah. Okay, good. So this is all the good process. This is what we want. This is group work. Now we're going to do something different. We're going to split up into new groups based on these 4 projects. So you guys will have the rest of class and beyond. Class is till 8:30, right, Jonathan? We're here till 9. Yeah. So you guys will get to stay here until we lock you out, and you can work on any one of these things. So think about which of your skills you'd like to practice. Can you comfortably build hangmans? If not, maybe do that. I don't think you guys are really going to have time to fully build hangman, but you can at least talk about it.
Jonathan, are we still going to, I think we talked about going over some strategies for hangman, maybe on a sorry, I can't talk. During office hours, that was floating around. I don't know.
I don't know anything about that. You have the video. You can watch the video.
I'd love it. I'll talk to you after class.
Yeah. Watching the video is a good way. So, conceptually, how the Captain Planet game works, that might be a good one for some of you guys. If some of you guys got confused, especially the specifics of how the CSS works, and they can stretch, all this stuff you guys. So that might be a good one for some of you guys. Comfortably use jQuery to modify HTML based on clicks. Yeah.
What Captain Planet is?
The one
that you were absent for, the one you couldn't even be bothered to come to class.
You can come back and see Falcon now.
We have a video for you if you want to watch it. Basically, Captain Planet has a game. You can stretch. You do different things. Captain Planet with CSS. Yeah.
Can we do the calculator that we were doing on Saturday? We didn't finish.
The calculator. I want you guys to do one of these 4 because they're simpler. The calculator is a little bit more complicated. So if you guys want to work together on the calculator, you can do
I
that.
don't remember the lottery.
That's the one with the random number.
I think it was one of the easy exercises where you could have done a hard one, like the ESP.
That was when you first introduced the math door, you just literally had to click the button and then it would give you a number.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's just gonna do. Remember the one we did in class? That was like 1 line of code. You guys did it.
And then it showed that I can press the shift.
Yeah, you press a button. It says generate random number, so you press the generate random number button, and then it just writes a random number to give on top of it, right? So you just push it. What? You don't remember that one? Who remembers the random number generator? A bunch of you guys should.
I remember we saw how to do that, but
we did it in class. You guys had an opportunity to work on it in small groups, and then we did it in class. Jonathan, you remember that, right? Isn't that crazy? Random number generator. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know how to do it.
There was one with the...
Yeah, random number generator. So guys, this is how number 3 is going to work. You're going to generate a random number. You'll press the generate random number button, and then it will write a random number.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. We didn't call it a lottery generator.
No, it wasn't called a lottery generator. It's called a random number generator. Sorry about that. Okay. And then number 1, comfortably create a grid-based design with Twitter Bootstrap. I bet a bunch of you guys still need practice with that, right? So here's how we're going to do this. Are you guys ready?
Sure.
Let's everyone stand up out of our seats.
Why are you trying to separate us, Jonathan?
We didn't even
Only
for an hour. Okay, shake off your right leg, shake off your left leg, shake off your arm, shake off everything. Okay, now everyone who number 1 is calling to, who saw number 1 and said, yeah, that's my thing, I want to do hangman, go stand in that corner. Hangman
not
people.
enough time.
No, we want to.
Yeah, well, I have problems time is always a problem, but you can talk about Hangman.
I want, I'll go because I'll listen.
Okay.
And I'll learn.
Yes,
Yeah.
listen and learn.
Okay, so
Hangman
I'm
people over there.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, a lot of Hangman people. Okay, Captain Planet people, you're in that corner. Captain Planet people, go over there. Okay, I think we have. Yeah, guys, it was all spread out. So like, Sam, you did a good job on Hangman. Maybe go to like Captain Planet. You didn't get to do Hangman at all, so maybe you want to go to Captain Planet. No, you didn't get to do Captain Planet at all. You did a good job on Hangman, didn't you?
Okay, yeah, I'll learn how to do it.
I'll save the planet to you.
So, yeah, so all of you guys are like pretty much on Hangman. Some of you guys want to learn about Captain Planet. Some of you guys are going to want to learn about jQuery and clicks. Who isn't quite clear on clicks and jQuery? I know like one of you guys are. Okay, so it looks like you guys all want to just do Captain or Hangman then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we do it as a class?
Okay, we can do Hangman as a class for the last half hour.
We want Hangman.
Yeah, I mean, I already did Hangman for you guys as a class. You got a full live coding of Hangman. Okay. Okay. Okay, so in the last 15 minutes of class, I will attempt to demystify Hangman. Where to start? Like, what questions do you guys still have about Hangman? Lauren? What questions about Hangman? Yeah, where do we start with the Hangman thing?
Just suitable. My biggest question last week, and I kind of did this homework, got a better sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest thing is like breaking everything down into smaller pieces.
Yeah, guys.
Correctly. Like my biggest issue with Hangman was that I would put too much in one function, so I had like 4 functions that did everything. And I kind of got better at that at this homework, but I'm still, sometimes I still try to make them, like, break it down more, and then I move them around, and I'm like, oh, great, that's just.
Right, yeah, because things break a lot more easily when you have bigger pieces. You can kind of think about it like you're building something with, like, Legos or an erector set. So you can think about, does anybody remember, like, when you build Legos by the instructions, and they say you put this little piece with this little piece? You'll notice they always have you building things in nice little chunks, and then you put the little chunks together. If your little chunks get too big, they're going to break apart and they won't do it. So you want to build things in nice little chunks so they fit together. So you guys saw the way I did it, right? Where I wrote all the function names first. I said I know I'm going to want to handle key press event, and then I know I'm going to want to handle a correct key and then an incorrect key, and then I'm going to want to handle when the key has already been pressed. I'm going to want to, so I think go through, think about all of the things that are going to need to happen. Yeah.
I saw the tutorial you did online.
Yeah.
Is there like a simpler way to do it? Because I feel like all the tutorials that I was watching, like they simplified that whole process.
Yeah.
In like less variables, less functions, than like what we did in like the actual tutorial.
So there's always simpler ways to do things. The question is it going to be confusing? Because sometimes you do things really simply, and then something breaks and you can't find it, and it ends up confusing it. That's why I like to write things into small functions. Ideally, every function should take one input and give you one output and do one thing. So I try to write my code that way, and it's simple in the sense that it's simple to understand. So sometimes things being simple to understand is better than it having less like moving parts, or there's less variables, or there's less lines of code. Even. And then once, sorry, I'll get to you in a second line. But once you get things to a place where they're working, then that's the best time to say, okay, now how can I simplify it? Is there something that I can take out? Is there any duplication? But sometimes when you try to get things to work like simply before they even work, it's kind of putting the cart before the horse. Make sense? Well, so Lauren and then.
I think my issue with that, maybe like clarifying more, is that even when things are smaller, I still have issues with like what order they go in so that they actually work. Like even though I think like, okay, well this function is going to go before this callback, but then the game gets so complicated that then I missed a step and I kind of still get confused along the way.
Right. So a lot of that is like the flow of what function is calling another function. When we get into talking about object-oriented programming and making modules and classes and stuff, some of that will make more sense because you will structure things together. Like you might have one section that's just for your things that check things, one thing that's just for your things that update things, one section that's just for your handlers. Oh gosh, why are there so many Amber alerts? Yeah, I guess so. Well, if anyone has seen her. Okay. So yeah, so I hope this is making sense to you guys. It seems like you're getting the hang of it. A lot of these questions that you guys have are like more advanced questions in programming. And JavaScript is a very unstructured language. So a lot of the questions come from the different, or a lot of the answers to these questions come from the different styles of doing them. And there isn't one like set in stone answer for all of JavaScript. Jackie?
So but like Marion said, for the pseudocoding, did you write down how you wanted to do the functions or the variables? I mean, how did you pseudocode?
Well, you can see it on the video. I didn't pseudocode, I wrote the function. So I said, let's think about everything that's going to need to happen here, right? First, I'm going to have a listener that's going to listen for my key press. Then I'm going to have it do this. So I just go through, I think of all the eventualities, all the things that are going to happen, all the things I'm going to have to figure out, and then I'm going to have to figure out, are they functions? So usually I'll go write a function for every little block of logic. I know I'm going to need to handle a key press. I know I'm going to need to handle a correct key press. I know I'm going to need to handle an incorrect key press. I know I'm going to have to handle a key press for a key that's been pressed before. I know I'm going to need to add dashes for my words. I know I'm going to need to add in the correct letters when a correct letter gets pressed. So I go through and I figure out each of these things that has to happen. And then a quick way to do it is to write a function for each thing, because that way you already have it broken up into functions. Then you can just go through and fill out like everything that's missing. And then it's just a matter of writing your little bit of JavaScript for every little thing. So you've transformed like a big problem of how to make a hangman game work into a whole lot of little JavaScript problems that are pretty easy to go and Google and solve and stuff. Because if you look up like how do I build a hangman game on Google, you'll get some stuff, but it'll be the way that other people want to do it. So you can break it up to do it like the way you want to do it that makes sense to you, and then figure out how to make each of those little pieces work. Yeah.
So one of the hangman tutorials I was watching, instead of using for loops, he used while, and that's the jQuery way. Right? Like in what instance? No,
while is not jQuery. It's Java. It's still JavaScript. So I used while with mine.
Like when would you choose that while?
Okay, so while we can talk about that. Right now, for is the only type of loop we covered. We'll cover other ones in more detail later in later classes. So the reason you do while keeps going until something is true. So the main way to think about the difference between for and while is for will do something a set amount of times, while will do something until something becomes true.
So it's like almost a combination. And then
yeah, it is. It's waiting for a condition to become true. So you're basically saying, keep doing this until something changes. So it's like you're waiting. So for is do something a set number of times, while is do something until something changes. So you can almost think of it like it's called a while loop, but it would make more sense almost if they called it like an until loop, because it's like saying keep doing this until something changes. So like in my case, I used a while loop to fill in the correct guesses into the blanked out word. And I said, while there's still this letter in the word, keep doing this. And then every time I would put in a correct letter in the blanked out word, I would blank out that letter in the correct word that had been chosen. So that way I would know when all of those letters were done. And that was the way that I chose to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would just have to practice with it. I watched your video like 1.5 times. And I just
yeah, while loop can be kind of dangerous too, because did you guys see how I kept running out of memory? So if you don't really know what you're doing, while loop can be dangerous for that reason, and they're not even recommended because it's easy to run into problems.
That was my issue. I was like, why is my internet not working?
Yeah, it's not the internet. It's your while loop.
I try to do while at the same thing.
Then while on that topic, then what would you suggest?
Hold on, let me see. Russ had his hand up first.
My question was, who saved all the functions? What's the difference? That way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I've covered this in here before. There are two different ways of doing things, two different styles. There's some very slight differences functionally in terms of what it is, but it's mostly a different style of coding. It does pretty much the same thing. The reason they have it that way is it's sort of like Lisp versus Java. In Java, you declare functions. Functions are not first-class citizens. They get treated totally differently than values like strings or numbers. In Lisp and Scheme, functions are first-class citizens, so they get treated exactly the same way as values like string, number, etc. So when JavaScript came out, remember that JavaScript was supposed to be exactly like Scheme. That's how the developer wanted it. And then the people at Netscape told him, no, go back and change a bunch of stuff to make it look like Java. So that was one of the things that he changed to make it look like Java. So that's why it is that way. I recommend that you do it the way that I show you guys, set a variable to equal a function. Okay, Jackie?
Arrays versus the objects.
What about them?
I think, I don't want to jump ahead, but if we would have used an array, not an object for the word and then the guesses, number of guesses, was that done? That would have not worked either.
Yeah, you could do like an object for the word. Yeah, so you could have, instead of using 3 variables, so we have our word, we have our number of guesses, and then, yeah, so you could have this be like game config. You could make an object called game config and then have a property called guesses, a property called, yeah, you could absolutely do it that way. Again, it's a matter of style. A lot of things in programming is doing the thing that makes the most sense at the time and goes with the style of what you're doing at the time, and you'll have lots of different choices in how you want to do things. So a lot of what you'll learn about programming is learning to recognize the choices that make the most sense in a given context, or the things that go with the style of programming. Sense of style is very, very important when learning to become a programmer, and that's how you'll learn like what things should be arguments, what things should be variables, when should I put things in an argument or in an object, when should I just leave them as variables. A lot of cases it won't really matter. It won't affect the quality of your product. It's just a matter of what makes it easiest for you to understand and what makes it easiest for the people coming in behind you to understand.
So back to the notion I write, maintain code. Is that what you always want to keep in mind?
Yes, exactly. That's what you want to keep in mind. You don't want to do something that's like really easy where you abbreviated everything and didn't leave yourself any breadcrumbs to get back. You want to always write code that other people can easily read, that's maintainable, that you can go back and read a year from now and won't get lost, which probably, I guarantee you guys, if you ever do go back and look at this code you've done, like a year from now, you'll be like, what was I thinking? It'll probably have come so far by then, like you'll be just in another universe. So any more questions on Hangman?
Can we retake that?
Yeah.
Going back to the functions thing, earlier I picked up on a couple things. We say no for loops and if statements within the function.
Yeah.
Then a function takes an input, sends an output. Is there any other indicator that's used when considering whether or not to put something into a function?
Usually just err on the side of put it into a function. A function should do one thing. So the mistake a lot of programmers will make is their functions will do 2 things, 3 things, 4 or 5 things. And that's how code gets very cluttered, very hard to read. So a function should do one very clear thing that you could clearly state in English. Like with the Hangman game, I say blank out word. That's one thing. You're taking the word, you're making blanked out underscores for the word. Or fill in the correct letters in the word. That's one thing. You're putting the correct letters in the word. So try to break it into like one logical step. A function should never have more than one logical step. Yes.
And from there, you can make another function that calls a bunch of different functions and call that whole thing one process, right?
Right. So you could call that function one process. Like you have a start game function that calls all the other functions that start the game. Then you have like a reset game. Yeah. So you have functions nested within functions. Definitely. That's why when I tell you guys don't put a for loop in an if statement, I mean put the for loop inside a function and then call the function from inside the if statement. Make sense to everyone? Did that answer your question? Okay. Cool. Yeah, Lauren.
I'm still kind of thinking about when a function could return something. I don't really know how to return something, but code, or am I actually?
Yeah. So that's another style thing that I hope you guys will all read the Professor Frisbee book, and that will give you a lot of insight on how you guys should be doing this stuff in a really good way that a lot of professional JavaScript programmers don't even learn. But basically, most functions should return something. If you're doing something right, it should take an argument as an input and then return something as an output. A lot of times, programmers won't do that. They'll have it like update a variable instead a global variable, and then you get that back from the global variable. That's not the preferred way to do it. It's better if you can pass something into the function and then get something returned back from it. So short answer, like whenever you can, make it return something, and then try to not make it have side effects too. That's another important thing that you guys want to watch out for. So have it not like change anything else in your program. Just take one input and give an output. When you can. There'll be times when it's hard to do that, but when you can, try to do that.
So is that the difference between function declaration and function expression? Or is that a whole separate topic?
No, that's just like you declare the function, then you call the function, right? So you write the function, you write what it does, and then when you're ready to use it, you call it. Make sense? Melvin, did you have a question?
The only thing I would bring up is if no one had any more questions, if, aside from what we've already covered in today's class, if there's any other errors or bad habits you saw us doing that we should.
Yeah, well, I covered a lot of them. The stuff that I saw in the homework: make proper indentations, put your line breaks at the right place. One thing you guys might want to try is something called JS lint for your JavaScript. It will lint. It will. Their difference at LINT, like lint. It's actually lint is actually a tool for C that finds errors in your C programs, and then a programmer, Douglas Crockford, who will cover in later lessons, basically wrote a JavaScript version of it. Sometimes it'll tell you things about your code that aren't really important to you, so you don't have to give everything like absolute credence. You can write totally good JavaScript that fails JSLint, but it's just a good tool to look at to get you in the habit of seeing what you're doing. Another thing, that same developer, Douglas Crockford, has a very good book, which I would recommend for all of you, and their videos on that book too. It's called JavaScript, The Good Parts. And what he says is that JavaScript has a lot of bad parts that people basically shouldn't use, but when you use just these good parts of JavaScript, then you have a really good programming language. So JavaScript, he says, has lots of bad parts. There are lots of features in JavaScript that people shouldn't use. Like, for example, case statements. That's one other thing I saw in the homework. Some people used case statements. That's considered to be one of the bad parts of JavaScript. So you shouldn't use case statements. There are also some other things. So to learn what all of them are, you kind of have to watch the videos and read the books, and he'll explain why he thinks some parts of JavaScript are bad and why you should only use certain parts. And watching those people, because he's a very accomplished, very smart computer science professor. So the more you can watch people like that who really know their stuff talk about it, the more you'll start to really understand the language. It is called JavaScript, The Good Parts. Oh, the professor's name is Douglas Crockford. Crockford. Yeah, I'll send it out to you guys on Slack. Any other questions?
If we're not using objects and we're using functions, we have to get away from using variables. What's the methodology there?
Okay, so we're going to have more lessons on all of this stuff, object-oriented programming, how to get out of using the global variables. So the one way you guys have had recommended for you so far is by using this. Hold on. So who remembers when we talked about structuring our programs as objects? That was one of the suggestions for the Hangman game. Did any of you guys see that?
Yeah, with one of those hard mode bonuses that have the bottom of the
Yeah. So this is what you can do. Say you have a program. I'm just going to call it my app. I can use this as a namespace, and then I can write all of my methods and properties in here. So like global variables would become properties of this object. So I could have stuff like starting word. So you could make your Hangman game like this. You could make all of the global variables properties, and then we'll just call this HTML, and then make all of your functions methods, right? Make sense? And then you use the this contextual this to access the thing using scope and stuff. So that makes it harder, but by doing this, you solve the problem of namespacing. So now all of your methods and properties are behind this my app namespace. So none of the stuff you use conflicts except for my app. So you have that. Then there are other ways of doing this as well. I can show you guys, we are out of time, and we'll cover this in other lessons. What I can do is I can post this stuff for you guys online, because this is like probably a good 20 minutes of material to really get into some of the other ways to do that. Any other quick questions before we break? No? Quick class today, huh, guys?
Wait, are we not finishing?
Wait.
9:30?
Oh, are we finishing 9:30? Oh, okay.
Wow, you really wanted to get rid of this.
I don't know. No, see, the thing is, my schedule here only goes till like 7:30, so that's why I get confused. So I couldn't. Yeah. So we're supposed to have 2 hours to work on that exercise. So I think what we could do, because I'm not going to be able to answer hangman questions for a whole 2 hours. Why don't you guys work? How many of you guys want to work on hangman? Like almost all of you? But not right now. Okay. So then you get to choose one of the other 4 things. We're going to go back to this, guys. Let's all stand up and we're going to choose our groups again. I should have made you guys just do this the first time.
Let's do the Star Wars thing.
Okay.
Because some people are still looking for extension.
Yes, that's a no.
No.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think it's a no, like, it would be
yes.
interesting to see this.
Yeah.
I didn't try it.
Okay, so people who still want to learn about hangman. Yeah.
Hangman is just more of remembering the individual.
Yeah.
For me, it's remembering like what I do.
Come on, guys, stand. When you say stand.
Because I have a puppy.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, who, hangman people in that corner, if you still have questions about hangman, if everybody don't go in that corner, like 1 or 2 of you, and somebody from your group is going there. Okay, so like a few of you, let's not everybody go in that corner though, because we have plenty of other fun stuff to choose from too. We could also do Captain Planet. I know a lot of you guys didn't quite get Captain Planet. It would support you guys as developers to learn about Captain Planet. Yeah, so why Captain Planet people go in that corner, guys choose a corner though, don't be like in the middle. So Captain Planet people in that corner, then jQuery with basic clicks, the lottery generator. Did anybody not understand the random number generator? If you didn't understand the random number generator example, you should be in that. Random number. Did everyone get that? Random number? Okay, why don't you go in that corner, Vivian, and then maybe like somebody who did kind of understand the random number generator and wants to practice it. Okay, you want to do it? Gretel? Okay, so somebody be in that corner with Fabian and do the random number generator. Do you want to do that? Okay, so you got you 2 in that corner. Anyone else? Yeah. Anyone else who wants to do the random number generator, go in that corner as well. Where are you going? You guys are in that corner? Yeah, you'll get your laptop. Guys, just go. Okay, so then we have our last option. I know you guys all want this one, Bootstrap, okay? Okay, so you guys are 2 Bootstrap guys, that's it? Nobody else needs practice with Bootstrap? Russ? Your hand up? Okay, Mario, where are you? Pick a corner. Okay, Bootstrap. Okay, so how do we make this fun? You guys are going to come up with a name. This is hardly fair. Okay.
Yeah, I'm glad we're not fighting.
Okay, guys, take 3 minutes. Come up with a name for your team and a team mascot.
I just need to keep playing. I still need to.
Whenever you expect there's gonna be. We are 4 of us. We can around this up to the hand.
Can't even come up with a name. How are you gonna actually do
Okay, you guys got it? Okay, you guys got your team name? Here, what is it? Okay, we'll come.
Rock and rope.
Rock and rope? The Killer. Okay, you guys can sit down. Now you have your name. Team mascot? Okay, I'm over it. Go sit down. Okay. Team over there, what's your team name?
Our mascot is the entire band.
Wait, what? Mackie. What is it? For random numbers? Yeah. Okay. What do you guys? What did you guys come up with? Fantastic Four. Okay, I like it. There's 4 of you. Okay. What team are you guys on? John and Jose. Which exercise are you guys doing? Okay, why don't you go over there? Go in that corner with the hangman people. Okay, you guys have this.
You guys are so clear on this?